In the summer of 1979, California's quiet streets would become the setting for one of the most horrifying true crime stories in history. Two men, seemingly ordinary, would soon unleash a reign of terror that would leave the world shaken. Their method? Unthinkably brutal. Their weapon? A simple toolbox. This isn't just the story of a killer, it's a story of obsession, cruelty, and a game far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. But the truth? It's darker than anyone ever expected. In this episode, we'll take you deep into the chilling case of the Toolbox Killers. But don't expect this to be an easy listen. What we uncover will leave you questioning the darkness lurking just beneath the surface. Before we start, make sure you subscribe, smash that follow button, and leave comments what type of true crime you'd like to hear next. Let's begin. In the 1970s, the Toolbox Killers, two names you probably wouldn't want to know, terrorized California, leaving a trail of horror that would eventually lead to one of the most grotesque killing sprees the country had ever seen. And when the story of these men unfolded, it became one of the most disturbing chapters in true crime history. Enter Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, two men whose names are forever linked to a nightmare of their own making. Let's set the scene. California, the summer of 1979. It's a hot, sticky time in the San Gabriel Mountains, far enough from the cities that people think they're safe. But lurking in the shadows were two predators, planning something monstrous. Bittaker and Norris weren't just your run-of-the-mill criminals. They were something far more chilling. They were methodical, and what they did to their victims was horrifying in ways that you couldn't even imagine. Their weapon of choice? A metal toolbox. The first of their victims was Jacqueline Doris. On June 24, 1979, she was hitchhiking along a lonely stretch of highway when Bittaker and Norris picked her up. The men had already been in the act of hunting, searching for their next prey, and Jacqueline had unknowingly walked right into their trap. What followed was nothing short of torture. Bittaker and Norris didn't just kill, they delighted in their victim's suffering. They kept Jacqueline alive for hours, subjecting her to unimaginable pain before finally ending her life. But that was just the beginning, because once they'd killed Jacqueline, they set their sights on more, much more. Over the next 5 months, they would pick up 5 more young women, each one unsuspecting, trusting, just like Jacqueline. And each time, the same routine: torture, abuse, and death. The toolbox came to symbolize their twisted game, each tool used for a different, sinister purpose. But the thing that made the Toolbox Killers different from other serial killers wasn't just the tools. It was their twisted sense of entertainment. Bittaker, the ringleader, was particularly obsessed with the idea of recording the screams of his victims. He actually brought a tape recorder with him on some of these abductions, hoping to capture the terror, the raw, unfiltered fear that filled the air as his victims begged for their lives. Bittaker and Norris would take their victims to remote spots in the mountains, where they could do whatever they wanted without the risk of anyone hearing or finding out. They called these areas their kill zones, and in these remote locations, their victims would experience pure terror. Some of them, before they died, actually attempted to fight back, but it was always in vain. Then the unthinkable happened. After their last murder, the men believed they were untouchable, their crimes buried in the wilderness. But they had underestimated one thing: their own egos. The two men had been getting cocky. Norris, who wasn't quite as composed as Bittaker, began talking. In 1979, he confessed to a fellow inmate about the murders. But Norris wasn't smart enough to just confess to anyone. He told the wrong person. This confession reached the police, and soon Norris was cooperating with investigators. He started spilling everything, every detail, every murder, and the horrifying plans that had been carried out. In a stunning turn, Norris led the police straight to Bittaker, and together they were arrested. The investigation uncovered tapes of the victims' screams, recorded by Bittaker himself, along with photographs of the mutilated bodies. The horrors these men had inflicted on their victims were beyond comprehension. It was like they were not just killers, they were sadists living out their darkest fantasies. The court case that followed was a nightmare in itself. Bittaker and Norris were charged with multiple counts of murder, with Bittaker being the prime culprit, having orchestrated every single one of the killings. But the most chilling aspect of the trial was that, to the very end, Bittaker showed no remorse. In fact, he reveled in the infamy, almost as though he enjoyed being the center of attention. Today, Bittaker is serving a life sentence, and Norris was convicted and sentenced to 45 years to life, but later testified against Bittaker. Norris is eligible for parole in the future, though many believe he should never walk free. And while the two men are behind bars, the shadow of their crime still lingers over California. The toolbox, once a simple tool for carpentry, will forever be associated with terror, brutality, and the chilling reminder that sometimes evil doesn't need a mask to hide behind. It can wear a friendly face and blend into society.